Yesterday, NCAA President Mark Emmert made it clear that his organization, the NCAA, has no authority to tell the SEC, the ACC, or the Big 12 whether or not they can play football this fall. Here is what Emmert had to say regarding fall sports in general.
We cannot now, at this point, have fall NCAA championships because there's not enough schools participating. The board also established, Board of Governors also said, look, if you don't have half of the schools playing a sport, you can't have a legitimate championship. So we can't in any Division I NCAA championship sport now, which is everything other than FBS football that goes on in the fall.
It's an incredibly important distinction that I'm not sure everyone fully understands. He basically said there will be no championships decided in the NCAA this fall. It doesn't apply to football. Meanwhile, this quote yesterday from an infectious disease advisor to the NCAA named Carlos Del Rio. He said, I feel like the Titanic. We have hit the iceberg and we're trying to make decisions of what time we should have the band play. We need to focus on what's important. What's important right now is we need to control this virus. Not having fall sports this year and controlling this virus would be, to me, the #1 priority. So there's a lot to unpack there. And here to do it are Paul Finebaum and Heather Dinich, our insider, and we will start with you. Heather, first, I don't know that everyone understands, before we get to those quotes, I don't know that everyone understands the distinction that Emmert is making there. But the NCAA, for lack of a better way of putting it, has no control or say over what the football programs decide to do, right? So what he said yesterday doesn't in any way affect the SEC, the Big 12, or the ACC.
Not immediately, Greeny, but I asked Big 12 Commissioner Bob Bowlesby what, if any, impact it would have on FBS football, and he said that's still under consideration, because what people have to remember is that while we're essentially talking about FCS football, volleyball, men's and women's soccer, and cross country, if those sports decide not to play, then that is an optics issue for football. Right now, the NCAA is telling those other sports, you cannot compete for a national title right now. They have to decide whether or not they can compete for a national title in the spring. Shane Lyons at West Virginia is the chair of the Football Oversight Committee. He said there are some FCS football programs that are still trying to play some non-conference football games. His team is trying to play one of them. So all of those things, there's still a lot of questions. But again, Mark Emmert, in the same breath that he said they should try to play these championships in the spring, also said don't forget about this past spring's athletes that got their championships taken away from them. So you're getting a log jam now, a couple of months from now, and all of these people trying to squeeze everything in.
Absolutely. And it's hard to sort of keep everything straight. But, Paul, as you hear the president of the NCAA say there will be no other championships competed for in the fall, and you hear this infectious disease advisor saying, I feel like the Titanic, and we're trying to figure out what time the band needs to play. What impact do things like that have, in your mind, on the decisions regarding football that will ultimately be made?
Greeny, I think the combination of those two will be significant. It may not be today or tomorrow, but I mean, I'm sitting here listening to that again and shaking my head in somewhat amazement, even though we all know, and we've been talking about this ad nauseum, that Mark Emmert does not have the power. But the idea and the optics, most importantly, of the head of the NCAA essentially saying, you know, you really shouldn't go on, and we can't go on because we don't have enough teams competing. And meanwhile, you swivel the camera around, and there's the Big 12, the SEC, and the ACC marching along like they're not even hearing the rest of the country talk. I mean, it is a singularly stunning moment in the history of college sports, what we're watching here, and it's a long way from being over. I say that not really. I mean, we may be days or weeks away from this being resolved, but it is simply shocking how dysfunctional this sport is.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.